All right, what's up, everybody? My name is Brian, and I'm here with Will Andrews of West Coast Drum Shop in Bellevue, Washington. We're here doing a Dialtune demo day. We have a whole bunch of drums in the shop. If you are anywhere near the vicinity, you're welcome to come in and come hang out with us. We're having some fun. But I wanted to sit down with Will and have a conversation, heart to heart, face to face, about this drum technology. You've seen this journey. You've been with us on this journey, really, from like the beginning. I would love to hear kind of your point of view. What does this drum technology mean to you? How is it like you've seen so many drums? What is Dialtune in your opinion? I'm going to give you the mic.
Sure. I think for me, it ticks a lot of boxes that no other drum does. Obviously, they tune up very easily. You can experiment very easily. You don't have to have like a vast knowledge of how to tweak things with the drum key and spend all that time. You don't need to tweaks. You don't need to watch YouTube videos. You just turn a knob for the batter head, you turn a knob for the reso head, and you're going to find a good sound no matter what you do, and then you can get it further dialed in from there. But for me personally, there's a couple other things that I love about these. They're called Dialtune, but you could also call them stay in tune because they don't detune when you're playing them. And for me, I hit loud rim shots in most of the bands I'm playing in, and when I'm playing in the studio, for some reason I'm smacking the snare drum to try to like activate the room, so the room mics pick up on the snare and stuff like that. And all of my snares with normal tension rods, just the rods back out, and you have to kind of keep tuning the drum up in between takes. I've tried lug locks, I've tried other things, and when I've done demos of the Dialtune snares, I'll hit them as hard as I want, and nothing moves, right? So it's killer. I mean, if you're in the studio too, and you're trying to get that snare drum to work with the room, right? Work with the microphones. As the drummer in the throne, you can't hear what's coming through the speakers, right? So, I mean, for me, like having an engineer kind of give you the thumbs up or the thumbs down, you can experiment by twisting these knobs as you're hitting your drum. Because I mean, you have no frame of reference, but they do. They're there, and because you don't have to do so many moves, right? You can just turn a knob. They get like instantaneous feedback over what the drum is sounding like through the speakers. So, I mean, you could do the same thing at a live show too with the live sound engineer, So there's so many other advantages besides being a wicked cool technology, something that's going to save people hours of time, maybe days of time, and frustration and all that stuff. So
The piece that you're talking about, which I really appreciate, in this technology is the tuning mechanism. So it's a worm gear. And for those familiar with worm gears, if you ever tuned a guitar before, it's a very similar technology. It allows you to tune it up and tune it down. It doesn't use any like ratchet, like where it kind of locks in the sound. You can freely tune it up, freely tune it down, and kind of find it in the middle. But we specially engineered our version of a worm gear so that it would hold tension throughout the tunable range, all the way bottomed out to as high cranked as you can go for a 14-inch drum that's 6.5 inches deep. And one of the things I appreciate that I've learned over time that's an advantage is the fact that you can actually tune this down below the register of most 14-inch snare drums. Not that you can't do that with a lug and tension rod drum, but there's a certain level of, let's say, vibration rattle that happens in the lugs when you tune it down so far on a lug and tension rod drum that you just don't have here because there's nothing rattling. It's just a cable kind of holding it. Yep. So that was another thing that I thought was particularly interesting. Will, a question for you. You talked about, you own a store. You have literally hundreds, thousands of drums in here. What really separates every other manufacturer from each other's manufacturers out there? Tell me more about how you think about that. What's the difference between this manufacturer versus that one?
Sure. Interestingly enough, I've come to learn over time that every manufacturer has their own kind of sound. It's a X brand sound versus a Y brand sound or whatever. And that's due to essentially each brand kind of, I think, coming up with their own feature set and sometimes their own shells, right? And that's what I've found. Sometimes it comes down to appearance. Sometimes it comes down to certain feature sets like throw off, butt plate, how they're making the bearing edges, are they going for something modern, something vintage, right? And that can appeal to different types of drummers and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like there's so many variables, and the more drums I play with, it's almost like the brand makes more of a difference than the actual shell material sometimes. If we're talking about wood drums or something like that, or metal drums, sometimes that brand has a very distinct sound. That's the biggest point for me these days.
When I look at drums, um, I used to work in a backline company. I was, doing drum teching for like Tooth and Nail. I've done a whole bunch of shows, done a bunch of tours. Seeing a lot of drums. You said something that stuck out to me. It's the shell material. What I would largely say is the biggest differentiator between manufacturers. I love that the hardware plays a huge aesthetic role, but rarely do I see hardware that does something unique and different. I love the fact, like, for example, Ludwig has these incredible lugs that have like this free floating mechanism on it. They attach, like, especially for the tom, their rack toms, one of their lugs for the drum itself is actually the rack tom holder for what you'd mount it on, kind of like a stand. Like, that's some innovative stuff. I love that. But acoustically, it's not making a huge difference. But the shell material, I really agree with that. I do think some of the best drums out there, that for whatever reason, Craviotto has a sound to it. I don't know why. For whatever reason, Black Beauty has a sound to it from Ludwig. For whatever reason, DW's, Santa Monica series has a sound to it, and like it's just in your head. I agree with you, and that's also why I think there's an opportunity here. I feel like we haven't really come forward in technology in decades, if you will. There's a lot of technology that happened over 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then we've kind of, I wouldn't say plateaued, but just haven't seen something net new and innovative yet. And that's kind of what, I'm hoping, at least from a Dialtune point of view, I'm hoping that's what we're kind of bringing to the table. I'd love to get your thoughts on innovation in the drum, industry.
Yeah, sure. No, I definitely tend to agree with that notion that there's been some stagnation. I mean, most drums are hoops, tension rods, lugs, throw off butt plate, snare beds, edges, right? And there's so much variety with just that, which is, it's kind of spectacular. I like how many choices we all have. But yeah, in a lot of ways, I mean, you could alter the drum by putting a different style hoop, maybe a die cast or, single flange or something, or clips, or go old school. But we're kind of looking towards, the past for all those innovations, die cast hoops, single flange hoops, all that stuff. So when it comes to innovation, I mean, there have been some other companies that have tried to do the whole, take one drum key and that tunes both heads, or, you use some other mechanism to try to, do this or that or whatever, try to get it. But it usually is pretty limiting because you don't have independent control over certain parameters, where 98% of drums are all manual. It's manual transmission. You got individual lugs you got to account for, and this and that. And a lot of drummers I've found, if you're really into it, you'll take the time to figure out how these things all work together. But most people just want to set up and play, and it can be a big barrier of entry for people to want to spend, a considerable amount of money on a really nice snare drum, which is the jewel of the drum kit. You got to have a killer snare, and it just makes playing so much more satisfying, I think, and you can really find your tone that way. And there's so many reasons as to why. But yeah, it's like, who's going to want to spend all that time and practice and blah, 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 and then add tuning to that mix? And it can be a little bit of a barrier of entry, right? Where something like this, you don't really need to worry about any of that. It takes all that out of the equation. And like you were saying earlier, you can't really mess the thing up, because if you go completely slack, there's still enough even tension around the hoop where you're going to get a note. It can go as low as a floor tom with ease. It just holds it in place, right? And some days you feel like playing on a nice sloppy kind of low snom sort of a sound, it's like a snare floor tom. Some days you want that middle of the road. Some days you want a piccolo, right? And because of how this system works, it allows you to get anything in between and all three things, perfectly.
I remember I play in a cover band right now, and because we play such a wide variety of music from such a wide variety of artists, there'll be a part of the set where, I'm playing Tennessee Whiskey by Chris Stapleton. I'm going to need something that's really sloppy, as you put it. I want that drum down. But in between that song, do you have the time with a normal snare drum to tune it back up? Because we're going to play, George Benson next, and I need a cracking snare. It's so crazy to me that with one drum, I actually can do that. I can tune my drum faster than my guitarist tunes his guitar. And just that flexibility and freedom alone, it's kind of gimmicky, but also it's kind of awesome that I can do that.
Totally. That's another thing that I meant to mention earlier. But yeah, the flexibility to actually change your sound in between songs and not do the little quick trick where you just drop one tension rod and you get wrinkles on your head, or it sounds kind of out of tune sloppy and not good sloppy. Like this actually tunes the drum properly while changing the pitch. Like it keeps the even tension on there so you don't have a bunch of weird, harmonics coming off the drum.
You get this probably more than a lot of people, and I'm hoping that folks on on watching this on live stream, whatever, they can hear this and figure out what to do with it, which is basically like there's a lot of people that ask, hey, I hear a lot of overtones in your drum. Tell me more about it. Your drum's really ringy. I'd love to push back and say, hey, that's actually a really good tuned drum. But like, well, you're the expert here. Tell me more about what is overtone, what happens, why is an overtone an overtone, and can you add overtones or can you only remove them? Like, tell me more about that.
Totally. When I first got my drum set when I think it was like 13, right? I hit the drums and they did not sound how I expected them to sound. I was expecting the sound from the recordings I was listening to, right? And that's not necessarily what drums sound like all the time. Depends on the recording, depends on the scenario, depends on the heads, it depends on the drummer, the engineer, the EQ, the compression, the effects, the everything, the mix, right? So all drums, if they have, a decent amount of tension on them, right? Or they're going to ring. They're going to have, I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Kind of that really long. There's a fundamental note, which is like the lowest notes, that right? And you have all this bing, all this high stuff on top of it. That to me is ring, right? Those are overtones. The fundamental is that lowest note. And a lot of people don't like ring because they're not used to hearing it in the context of the music they listen to, which is understandable. A lot of snare sounds are very short. They're quick. They're in and then they get out of the way and they make room for the next hi-hat or bass drum or other instrument in the music, right? And there's so many ways to control that, right? So when I tune a lot of drums here for the shop, for customers, for our videos. I've done a tuning tutorial for our YouTube channel.
Mention your YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's just at West Coast Drum Shop on YouTube. Yep. And in my opinion, what you want to do is you want to get the drum sounding great on its own. You want to get, more or less even tension all the way around the drum. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, right? You don't have to attune to a certain frequency or a certain note. You can just have it sound good within its self-contained thing, right? Like you don't have to have it be this mystical dark art, right? It just does it sound good to your ear? If it doesn't, maybe play it in context. See if it sounds good in context. If something still sounds off, maybe adjust the resonant side head, right? So that's kind of the thing. When you get the drums sounding good, then I think it's time to go ahead and remove some of the overtones. If you want to, right? If that's your thing. And there's so many ways. There's so many ways, especially nowadays. There's little dots you can put on, or gels, or there's leather pieces that clip on. There's all kinds of stuff, right? So snare weight, great product. Snaps right on, flip it down, and now all that bling, all that stuff is gone, and you just get the fundamental, and then it just gets right out of the way. Super cool.
There's a lot to be said, especially for drummers out there who are like, you want it all. If you really want it all, then what you want is a drum that's going to be in tune with itself. And the overtones that you hear is the natural relationship between the top head, the bottom head, and the shell. That's what it means to have a drum that's in tune with itself. You're going to get that overtone. And you can always remove overtones. You can remove it, as you mentioned. You can use gaff tape, you can use moon gel, you can use a reso ring, you can use a big fat snare drum, donut, or you could use a snare weight, whatever you want. You could use a wallet. We used a sandwich. We actually have a video on our YouTube channel about different muting options. You should absolutely check it out. But you can always remove overtone. You can't add it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes a song calls for overtone. Right. There are some great vintage recordings where you're listening to Creedence Clearwater, or you're listening to ZZ Top or something, and you hear the ring in that snare. Mm-hmm. And to try and find a way to add it when you can't, because for whatever reason, you're just unable to tune the drum the way you want to, that's really hard. But when you have a drum that's naturally going to give you what you need, it gives you more flexibility to find the sound that you're looking for faster.
I got another analogy here. So imagine a guitar, right? And you have 6 strings on a guitar. what the dial tune does is it kind of makes all 6 strings the same note, right? It's not going to play a chord for you, but it's a drum. You wouldn't want it necessarily to play a chord. But what you wouldn't want to do is have each one of those strings be slightly different from one another. And some of them are wildly out, right? Imagine what that sounds like. It sounds like just this total dissonant mess, if you can imagine that. What the dial tune does is it makes it all the same note all the way around, which focuses everything into a point. And you don't have, this has what, well, it's one note, but on a traditional drum, you have 6, 8, 10 lugs on it. You would have 10 notes coming from the drum. Yeah. And which can sound, I mean, I suppose in certain situations it could sound good, but in most situations it's going to be like ooh, fix that snare,
Last NAMM that we were at, there was 2 things that came out that were related to this that I just laugh at. One of our community members showed us how to find an alternative tuning, like a mass-off tuning. And all they did was tune down the drum enough that they could unloop one lug from a pulley. And now it's a mass-off tuning. And without putting any other stuff on the head, it sounded like it would if you were to detune one lug and kind of get that wrinkle that you're talking about. Similarly, we also heard from a couple of drummers a great analogy. You talked about a guitar tuning analogy. An analogy I use now all the time because I'm obsessed with it is the analogy of like a lug and tension rod is to manual transmissions in a car as dial tune is to automatic transmissions in a car. And really where that comes back to is the fact of like they're the same technology. Both help you move in your vehicle. Both help you tune your drum. One is fundamentally easier to do. To learn a manual, car transmission, how to drive one, you can do it. It just takes practice. Same with tuning a drum that has lug and tension rods. You can do it. It just takes a little bit of practice. But with this, just like getting a car, you put it in drive, you go. Just like this, you dial the dial and you go. That's kind of a thing.
And the car doesn't drive you drive it, right? So I think I made that analogy earlier with the manual versus automatic. I don't know if I said automatic, but I definitely said manual. Check the video and check my work on that one. But yeah, it makes sense. It's like you tell it what to do. So you still have to know how to drive a car, but there's far less steps than with a automatic transmission. That's the deal. So if it doesn't sound good, you only have really 2 to 3 things to worry about: the tension of each head and then the snares, and it's super simple.
All right. Last question before we close out here. What do you like drummers paying attention to the live stream, drummers watching our videos online, drummers who are going and playing dial tune? What do they need to know from someone who does not work at Dialtune?
This drum will probably give you the best possible sound you can get with the least amount of effort.
Mic drop. That was a mic drop if you didn't quite catch that thing, but this is an expensive mic. We won't actually drop it. Will, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. To everybody here at West Coast Drums, we love your shop. Anytime you guys are in the Seattle area, Washington State area, make sure that you stop by West Coast Drums in Bellevue. This is the penultimate drum shop in this area. These guys know it all. They're very, very smart about all things drums, including dial tune. So come by the shop, demo it, play it, tell us what you think. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys later.